Where do we start with Michael? Michael and I go way back, and we're part of a support society for a set of interests in architecture. And when we were all struggling, fascinated with some future in architecture, we all took care of each other. And my first memories, of course, with Michael would be staying with him in New York, and he put me up. And I can't remember, but he didn't have a guest bed because I slept in the Peche chair, and we would talk till all early morning hours. And Michael, of course, is I'm sure everybody's going to talk about, is this very unique character in our community. And he was brutally honest and straightforward in a way that gave you huge kind of trust, and he was fearless. He has a great respect for his the brutality of his honesty, and he was a rare character in our profession. Honestly, maybe a singular character. His voice was always discussing the importance of architecture as a social act and his commitment to social justice and an ethical position of architecture. And he was, he's funny. You probably can tell as I speak about him, it's really tough. He's a person I'm sure many of us miss. That as I was waking up this morning and thinking about this, I really miss you, Michael. Yeah. It's funny, I was going over my last emails with him, and I had just come back from, I think it was lecturing at the Stadel, and he was going back and forth to talk to me, and he wrote me regarding, he was, of course, immensely, I couldn't even keep up with the amount of journals he was putting out with his Terreform group, and between teaching and practicing and his publication. And we were, the last one I can remember was he was doing something with Eric Moss, and we were going back and forth, and I was writing something for that. And he had just said something, we were going back and forth, and he says, "You're one of my true loves. Let's live as long as we can."
Last night I went through a whole bunch of email exchanges with Michael. I've saved them because we go toe-to-toe in hilarity, and they just made me laugh all over again and made me think it's not possible that I'm not going to get another one.
The culture of architecture lost a year ago one of its most brilliant critical voices. Our generation of architects and urbanists lost an amazing thinker and an incredible writer. Michael Sorkin was a true visionary. I lost a brother. I can easily say without any hesitation that through my career I learned more from Michael Sorkin than from anyone else in the world of architecture and urbanism.
Hi, Michael. It's Eric. I thought I'd disguise myself a bit, give you an opportunity to make fun of me a little bit. Have some fun. I miss you. I love you. I certainly miss our lunches at Rosa's Cafe and you teasing me about the prima ballerina and the quarterback. I remember all of those discussions about you're the architect, you're the planner, you're the writer, you're the publisher, you're the lecturer, you're the teacher. And the pressures or the insistence that you are obligated somehow to pick one. The wonder of it all was that you picked all, and that's who you were, and that's how you defined yourself. That your special value to me as a person and as a friend and as a colleague, as well as your value generally in all of those venues, wasn't communicated to you, that I made a mistake, that the level of appreciation was implicit. So at least in retrospect, I'd like to make it explicit. I love you. I miss you. Look forward to our next encounter. Hasta la vista.
And I am quite an old friend of Michael's. We go back to crossing paths at MIT, although I remember him better from when I was teaching at Columbia University in the 1980s, when he was writing for the Village Voice, when there was great controversy around his writing. So I do go back quite some time knowing Michael as a very good friend, as a very generous colleague. So one of my earliest memories of Michael is when he didn't want to do something or couldn't do it because of other obligations, he would always turn to me, and he would do this repetitively. Turn to me and say, "Would you like to do this?" And The first time that he did that was when he stopped teaching at Cooper Union. I was leaving Columbia, and he asked, would you like to take over the 2-semester required urban class that he had inherited from Bernard Toomey? And instead of reaching for one of the boys to do it, he actually asked me, and that's what I mean by the generosity, but also his thinking of equity and sharing things, not just to the guys, but also to me, and that was incredible.
And the one text that I love the best is when he slammed Michael Graves' addition to the Whitney. First, he praises Marcel Breuer's Whitney with sentences like, the stepping out of the mass as it rises until its upper part presses against the street wall like Marcel Marceau limning a window.
He would type these articles, which he would actually joke and call them typing for dollars, while we were doing the design competitions. In a way, he changed my career and my view of urbanism and cities and justice and sustainability. He is greatly missed.
When I heard that Michael Sorkin passed away, I wrote this text. We lost a special urban planner, a lucid architect, an inspiring teacher, a sharp critic, and a glamorous writer. I lost a friend.
Michael Sorkin was a great critic, an inspired teacher, and a brilliant thinker. And happily for me, he was my friend. We would have a drink together once or twice a year, often a bourbon, frequently and appropriately enough a Manhattan, always at a neighborhood restaurant or bar, never at a touristy or swell kind of joint. Over our drinks, we'd talk about New York, from old New York to the New York we loved, to the New York we missed, to the New York we hoped for in the future. We were both New Yorkers. He, like me, never gave up on the city. He pushed for it to be less fancy and less uptight, and always pushed for it to be more just, more welcoming, more creative, and more free.
He was one who mastered two disciplines, the visual and the literal, the master of form and the master of words. His being a real urbanist made him both wonderful company and a great friend.
What I miss about him most, again, which is someone who could be intensely serious, someone who could explain the gods, someone who could take architecture and its complexities and put it on a level that all people could understand it, and then turn around and tell you one of the funniest stories that you've ever heard.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Dan McPhee, director of the Urban Design Forum, and one of the hosts of our program today celebrating Michael Sorkin's enduring contributions to design, criticism, and pedagogy. Introducing our event is a daunting task, in part because Michael's preambles were often a lot more entertaining than the events themselves. He was, in fact, the toughest act to follow. We have hundreds of guests tuning in from around the world because Michael's reach was wide and his grip was tight. But for those of you who didn't get the chance to know him, Michael was a charming designer, a side-splitting critic, a dogged mentor, and an excellent drinking buddy. And before all that, it turns out, a dinner theater actor down the Jersey Shore. Most of us know him as the fierce critic and rib-tickling writer. He first established himself at the Village Voice, later writing for Architectural Record and The Nation, before launching his own publishing imprint, UR, to support designers and researchers fighting for progressive and liberated urbanism. He was also an accomplished designer through his eponymous firm. His design work embraced sustainability and biophilia before it was even the thing to do. Many of his notable designs were never even intended to be built. He often dreamed up alternatives to the major planning projects of the day, advancing community-led visions, and enticing you always onto his side. He was a globe-trotting educator, teaching in 29 schools, most recently as the distinguished professor with the Spitzer School of Architecture at City College. His civic commitments included the Architectural League, ADPSR, and of course, Urban Design Forum and its predecessor, the Institute for Urban Design, which he naturally commingled as the Forstitute. We lost Michael 1 year ago today, and his loss remains a deep scar, marking for many of us a first loss to the pandemic, but also because we need Michael's buoyant imagination in these disruptive times. What would Michael demand of us is a question that's rattled through my head from early surges through the movement for Black lives to the late insurrection. I imagine he would induce us all to recalibrate the city around our essential workers and rally us around the democratic power of public space. I think he would have delighted in the spill of city life into the street and demanded that we make way for a little more chaos in the city. He once remarked, "I love it when people of faith and good heart collude in this collective work of art we call the city." I've been really grateful to collude with several of his comrades in the last year: Rosalie Ginevro, Sean Rickenbacker, Julio Salcedo Fernandez, Tammy Hausman, Dean Sharp, and Vijanti Rao, many of whom are about to appear on camera and without whom today's event would not be possible. Our aspiration is to collude with the rest of you today, to not only fondly remember our friend, but exhort you as Michael would, to demand a greater city, vital neighborhoods, and a democratic public realm. We want to look forward, charged by his spirit and imagination. Following our introduction, we're going to show another segment of our video from Michael's co-conspirators around the world. We'll then invite his friends Trevor Boddy, Eyal Weizman, Sharon Zukin, Teddy Cruz, and Fonna Forman to share a work of Michael's as inspiration. We'll present a final video before welcoming Michael's partner, Joan Copjec, to share a closing reflection. We recognize that Zoom is not a friendly format for reminiscence or exhortation, but we do welcome you to share a memory of Michael in the chat or record your own tribute to share with us later. And now I'd like to welcome my colleagues to join me on camera. Tammy?
And I'm a board member of the Urban Design Forum. We're the first national organization to exchange ideas and inspiration about urban design with the goal of making more dynamic, cooperative, and sustainable cities. For 15 years, Michael brought insight, passion, and humor to the forum, first as president of our predecessor organization, the Institute for Urban Design, for 9 years. Later, he was co-president of the Urban Design Forum when the Institute of Urban Design merged with the Forum for Urban Design. Along with the Architectural League, the Forum is creating a fellowship program to further Michael's legacy, which Rosalie Ginevro will be describing in more detail. Throughout his tenure on our board, Michael felt like our closest friend and our chief nemesis, rejecting complacency and always rallying for greater imagination. He peered deeply into our local communities as well as our psyches, acted as our conscience, cheered us on as we took to the pen, the sketch pad, or the streets, and made us better people and professionals for knowing him. And now I'd like to introduce Sean Rickenbacker from the City College of New York.
Thank you, Tammy. Good afternoon, everyone. It's truly wonderful to have so many of you with us here today to celebrate Michael. I am Sean Rickenbacker, Associate Professor and Director of the J. Max Bond Center for Urban Futures at the City College of New York, home to the nation's most diverse and public-facing Spitzer School of Architecture. This was also the academic home of Michael, and by choice for 20 years. He cared deeply about the public and sought to empower its myriad of actors. His intellectual and critical brilliance as a distinguished professor and director of the school's urban design program beams bright in the many who've been influenced by his generosity of instruction and prolific scholarship. It is here at Spitzer where he ignited countless discussions and debates of what is possible in the realm of radical design, writing, advocacy, and critical thinking. Things that address the social, cultural, environmental, and in his view, the planetary. As a colleague, the college faculty knew Michael as a constant interlocutor, braving new territory in every discussion to be had. He took pride in the range of his interdisciplinary friends and collaborators, with an invite always at the ready to write, design, and conspire along with him. I, as well as many of you, are considered among the comrades with whom Michael collaborated, directly or indirectly through his teaching, scholarship, and calling to arms in practice. We at Spitzer are honored to have had his presence among us and will carry his legacy forward. And now I'd like to introduce you to Julio Salcedo Fernandez, also of the City College of New York, Spitzer School of Architecture.
Thank you, Sean. I'm Julio Salcedo, Director of the Urban Design Program at City College. I am delighted to share with you the news of Michael fund. We are establishing the Sorkin Legacy Fund. The fund will support programs to continue Michael's many contributions, highlighting his activism and imaginative urban solutions for social and environmental justice. The fund will secure the following. Firstly, the fund will endow the acclaimed annual Lewis Mumford Lecture Series, which was established by Michael. The series is brings the world's most distinguished urbanists to speak freely and publicly about the future of cities. Jane Jacobs, author of several seminal books on urbanism, including The Death and Life of the Great American Cities, delivered its first lecture in 2004. Secondly, we'll establish annual symposia named after Michael. And thirdly, and perhaps just as importantly, we'll be housing and maintaining Michael's personal library at City College. The library is several thousand books that they're not only an engrossing resource, but they're a vivid testament to his wide-ranging scholarship and interest. Through these efforts, the Sorkin Legacy Fund will celebrate and invigorate Michael's activism, scholarship, and collaborative spirit. We're so excited to launch this in conjunction with dear organizations and people to Michael, the Urban Design Forum, the Architectural League, Terreform, and Joan. Please help me welcome Rosalie Ginevra.
Hello, my name is Rosalie Ginevra, and I'm Executive Director of the Architectural League. Michael was a board member of the League for 27 years and became a life trustee in 2019. As at all of the organizations and institutions that he was associated with, Michael was a provocateur and inciter on the board, a constant voice urging us to be bolder, to be clearer, to be more emphatic. He was also a beloved friend. One of the miracles of Michael was his bottomless capacity for friendship and his ability to be a generous, warm, stimulating, emboldening presence in so many people's lives. The League and its publication, Urban Omnibus, and the Urban Design Forum are working together to create a living memorial to Michael in the form of a fellowship program called New City Critics, which will support and mentor young critics and writers of color as they develop their capacity to be audacious and trenchant observers of cities and landscapes. We're very pleased to announce that the Graham Foundation has provided an initial seed grant to help us initiate our fundraising for this program. Now I'd like to turn it over to Dean Sharp.
Hello everyone, I'm Dean Sharp, the geographer and co-director with the anthropologist Vijayante Rao of Terreform. And Michael started Terreform in 2005, and I'm sure many of you in the audience will have had Michael sit down at the table at our offices and tell you that Terreform is a friend of the court. We take on vexing, pressing urban issues to fight for more beautiful, equitable, and just urban futures. This was the passion that Michael brought to these issues and, established urban research in 2016 as an imprint, and we have 24 books that we published in 5 years. Michael was nothing but prolific. And indeed, in 2021, Michael is keeping up his reputation. He's still producing, he's still coming out with questions and pushing us to think more critically and just about our urban futures. The first that has come out is Nanjing Charter by Urban Research. There was a collaboration with Eric Owen Moss. The second was a book that I've co-edited with Michael called Open Gaza, Architectures of Hope, that dismantles the siege, but also imagines progressive and hopeful urban futures for this beleaguered urban strip. And he's also co-editing a book on Mike Davis, the progressive leftist critic. Princeton University Press have also announced that they're going to republish 250 Things an Architect Should Know. And now, as we turn to the second segment of the video, in which it goes over Michael's roles as an architect, writer, teacher, I'd also just like to sum up by stressing Michael's role as a mentor, as someone that has greatly benefited from Michael's mentorship, and to all those that he's mentored, to really express our deep gratitude and thanks to this amazing North Star, who made the world more intellectually expansive, but also deeply more intimate. We miss you, Michael, but know that you're always here.
But as a thinker, we were brothers in arms because from a very different point of view, me from socially and him architecturally, which was the notion that to stimulate people, you had to disorient them. That the sort of big problems in capitalist society was that it aims at comfort, user-friendly. But neither of us believed that. It was wonderful for me knowing him in that way because, I came at this problem of this kind of over-regimented society from fairly standard sociological background, and he was the first architect I knew, or an architecturally trained person who saw that, who didn't just see it as a problem of labor or family life, who could actually see it physically in the city, that the problem was too much order rather than too little.
Michael taught us all is that, it's okay to disrupt this kind of openness of our art, right? And it actually gave me the courage actually to kind of do things the way I want to do them. The legacy to me is that kind of cultural context that Michael was able to, create and, bring many people together, and I think that's, when I leave this place, that's the kind of legacy I would want to leave as well.
Without mentioning his name or recalling a quote from one of his books or articles, was his humanizing impact, his ability to address people and their issues.
I mean, Michael he just gave hope in sort of the potentiality of what this space could mean. He was inspirational that it wasn't just the technical drawing, that he looked at sort of agriculture or green spaces in sort of, again, these traditionally stigmatized places, like, for example, public housing. He really created this equitable view and approach to how we look at spaces. And it really infused or activated this imagination of the potential of what can exist with the intentionality behind it.
Really, the thing that for me, I'll remember about Michael, or I just want to say, and I think this is often missed, how great of a talent he was as an architect, as a writer, of course. But as a designer, he really understood in full design, architecture, urbanism, and he had an incredible ability to communicate ideas what seemed so easy. And we all, when we write, we struggle, but it seemed for Michael like, oh my God, how does he do it?
But what is amazing about that is this incredible, and a very beautiful ambition of quite easily wanting to design a whole city. And this is what I mean by his ability to be incredibly critical, but to be ready to take on the challenge of being propositional. And I think, I don't know anyone else who can touch those two spectrums so easily, because even those propositions finally were the most lucid, visually beautiful ideas or representation of ideas for cities, which were unlike any other cities we probably have seen.
Michael's criticism is part of his larger quest for the beautiful and humane. He held himself accountable as a designer to himself as a critic. For every rapier, smart, often hysterically funny text he would write to expose some folly, he would design an exuberant proposal to deal with it.
Michael in every way was larger in life, but his energy, the damn guy was like a power station. And I must say that my debt to him is profound. He called me up out of the blue once at the end of the 80s. He said, I read this little thing you wrote about Frederick Jameson and the Portman Tower in downtown LA. He said, why don't you develop this in an article about the militarization of public space? I hadn't given a thought to this. before. To the extent that I became, or been called an urbanist, it's almost entirely due to the inspiration of Michael. Michael was a great writer. He was a poet like Whitman. I mean, he riffed it. I mean, I think of Michael, I think like the loft jazz scene in New York in the, the 80s or something. I mean, he knew how to blow. He really did.
And one of the things I particularly admire about that is the way he arrives. You can see him arriving at his opinion as you're reading. So he doesn't kind of think it all through and then give you the conclusion at the end. He kind of weighs both, or not both, multiple sides. He sees nuance. He plays one thing off against another. And he's not afraid of ambiguity and ambivalence, which again, in a critic, I think a lot of people feel that there's a danger in that because it can kind of weaken your writing, or you come out with something less punchy, and if you're not convinced, then you can't be convincing. And so his ability to have strong opinions, but sometimes strong opinions that were kind of in tension or opposition to each other, and reconcile them in a piece of writing, that's some virtuoso stuff right there.
This was really interesting about Michael, right? Because he worked all at these different scales, and I think that's what a good architect does, a good planner, an urban designer. But it's also crucial, I think, in a critic to be able to think at the scale of the curb, to understand what's happening in a particular place, on a particular site, at a particular moment, but then also to think globally and in terms of larger, to think at an urban scale, to think in terms of economies, and that ability to unite the curb and the global, and to think about how that will shape the world we want to have. That's, to me, what an architecture critic should aspire to, and Michael was as good an example of it as we've ever had.
And that whenever something changed or broke, let's say in Manhattan, he wanted for us to all go and fix it. There was something very practical in a generous sense, that this city is also our city. He always had the same level of voice and intensity. It didn't decrease with age, let's put it that way.
There is a wonderful Hebrew phrase, tikkun olam, which means to heal the world. Everything Michael Sorkin did, everything he wrote, was in service of tikkun olam, of healing the world. He truly believed that words could play a role in healing the world. And he believed even more, I think, that architecture could play a role in healing the world. And he devoted his life to both. He was sophisticated, he was knowing, he had everyone's number, and he had no illusions. Maybe that's the thing that was most miraculous about Michael from the beginning of his career to the end. Not the brilliant turns of phrase, not the commitment, critical though it was, but the way in which he could maintain his optimism in the face of reality. He did not see the world through rose-colored glasses. He saw it as it was, harsh and self-serving and narrow and petty and power-hungry, and too often interested in architecture only when it served power. But somehow he remained optimistic. He continued to believe that the next battle would be won, or if it was not, that the glory lay in making steps toward the victory that he knew would someday be won, somewhere by someone, and that he was giving them tools that would help them achieve it.
To see the facility through which Michael really became and owned the role of the designer and architect as a public intellectual, as an advocate and a critic, to be both honest as well as inclusive, and to help us understand the complexities, of the built environment in ways that we may not be able to read fully without the kind of insight and intelligence and wordsmithing that Michael brought to us. His attempts to kind of wrestle with the inherent challenges and contradictions of theory and practice, the praxis of our discipline, how you work within systems of power while critiquing them, and that will live on as well in his creation of multiple entities, a research entity, a publishing entity, a for-profit practice, a non-profit practice, an academic practice. These things are not unfamiliar to the ways in which we try to survive in the discipline, but I think they're particularly acute in Michael's case because of his role as a public intellectual and as a critic, but also as a theorist of how we try to wrestle with the complicities of power and putting things in the world that people have to live with.
Now I'd like to welcome Trevor Boddy, Eyal Weizman, Sharon Zukin, Teddy Cruz, and Fonna Forman to join us for a conversation on Michael's influence.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks all of you for coming today. I'm with you today as moderator, but I have a few words of my own to preface things. Food metaphors are inevitable when remembering Michael. So I'd like to add my own little bit of critical spice to the lamb biryani we are collectively stirring up today. Michael Sorkin was a master of one of the rarest but most necessary of the architectural arts, one that is rarely acknowledged, being most often noted when missing, like forgetting the garam masala in that same rice dish. I speak of the architectural art of editing. By this, I mean not only the editing of drawings and designs, which he did expertly, nor even the editing of his own text, where he constantly proved himself a brilliant and witty stylist, making necessary points in print others would not risk. What I'm referring to is instead his editing of books, including other writers. Michael would find a theme and a publisher, assemble a diverse choir of voices, then cajole them into, but not over-rehearsing his chosen essayists, getting them onto the stage, which is the page, writing an introduction that opens things up in unexpected and often mischievous ways, then singing out the praises of the resulting published volume at every possible opportunity. Michael was no copy editor, and with his frantic pace, sometimes our essays got scrambled in production. I know this from personal experience. But his taste in assembling and producing anthologies of urban architectural writing was impeccable. Michael often sensed the importance of an urban issue before anyone else, then pushed out a book while the idea was fresh and underreported. For example, Exquisite Course and the other collections of his own writings demonstrate brilliance on even more difficult terrain of rendering permanent his own critical ephemera. To edit is to make a fix, to set a mark, to dream an answer. Michael Sorkin is unsurpassed as an editor of architecture. A short anecdote with a punchline in the spirit of all of this. We can bring up my first image now. Michael Sorkin dragooned me as a Buckaroo Junior professor up there in Canada somewhere, as a writer in the collection, which became variations on the theme park, the New American City and the End of Public Space. Michael gave us the most basic but essential individual briefings about what the book was to be about. And even more cruelly, he did not let us know who else was in the book until the last possible moment. I got to know Ed Soja, Margaret Crawford only later when touring them around Vancouver, and I've still never met Mike Davis. Many who read Variations presume it to be a product of endless coordination, a prefatory symposium or two, a lengthy dialogue between us contributors. No, its real source was Michael's vision alone, one which allowed us all to write the city in our own ways, but to make sense together. And making sense together is the aim of today's session. When the book was finally about to be released by Farrar, Straus, and Giroux's imprint of Hill and Wang, Michael gave me one of his jokey, serious phone calls, telling me somewhat mysteriously that I was responsible for the cover. I was writing about the underground pedestrian zones of Montreal and Toronto and the elevated skyways of Minneapolis and Calgary. And my essay speculated on what these new separated analogous cities were doing to notions of public space. I had discussed the Corridoio Vesariano, which connects Florence's Palazzo Vecchio and the Pitti Palace. In my last paragraph, I wrote this proposition: we must resist the temptation to fancy ourselves the new Medici within our continuous sealed walkers' highways to art gallery, shopping center, health club, and other splendid palaces of refuge. So that was my closing sentence. In a classic Sorkin move, he never gave me a clear answer about whether this painting of Florentines on a down escalator was his idea for the cover or that of a designer at Farrar, Straus and Giroux. Nonetheless, this cover remained the world's most famous down escalator ride until 2015, when a very different New Yorker started his presidential campaign with a similar ride in the Trump Tower. Okay, enough of that. Now for the panel. I could take no credit for lining up today's sterling collection of designers and thinkers: Sharon Zukin, Teddy Cruz, Fonna Forman, and Eyal Weizman. Praise for that should go instead to their design forum and CCNY. Knowing that we would be preceded by video celebrations of Michael's memories from friends and colleagues around the world, my own contribution was devising the architecture of today's session. What I've done is I've asked each of our speakers to anchor their comments in one or two of Michael's writings or design works. The true imprint of the friend we lost. These creative works are his essence and will endure. And will anchor Michael to remember them here. Each of our panelists will have 5 to 7 minutes to name their choice of a Sorkin text and say why they have selected it. We'll then bridge into a joint discussion into the most important question before us. And that's really the theme of the day. What would Michael call on us to do next? That's worth repeating. What would Michael call on us to do next? Now for the first speaker. Michael's writings on buildings and cities were widely enjoyed, not just by architects, but a huge public, notably when he wrote for the Village Voice Weekly and the Nation Journal. His writings and urgent calls to reform city building were also taken seriously by scholars and academics in many other fields. A leading voice amongst them is Sharon Zukin, whose books, including Landscapes of Power and Cultures of Cities, have helped define the new urban sociology. Zukin has taught in Europe, Australia, and China, most recently at Brooklyn College at CUNY Graduate Center. You're up first, Sharon.
Thank you, Trevor. I am glad and sad to join you all today in celebrating Michael as a brilliant writer, a visionary architect, and a friend. For my spouse and me, going out to dinner with Michael and Joan has been just a very warm and necessary social experience. Like all of you, I will miss him. But I knew Michael mainly as a writer. I was a great fan of his columns in the Village Voice before I ever met him. The language that he effortlessly put on the page, the concepts that he created, the historical analogies that flowed as though they were so familiar to him. I was very impressed. As a writer, he's an impossible act to follow, kind of like if you're a stand-up comedian following Mark Twain on the program. So to understand what I think Michael would do right now, I have to say, he would identify the issue, he would bring people together, he would design something in collaboration with them, and he would publish an edited book. That's what he did with Friends about Gaza, Jerusalem, the US-Mexican border, the plans to build a Guggenheim Museum in Helsinki, and with me on After the Winter. If I remember correctly, Michael and I and other people attended a small meeting after the 9/11 attack at NYU. And afterwards I said to Michael, we really should get some people together and publish a book about this, a book by left-wing intellectuals. And of course, Michael being Michael said, yes, let's do it. So we put a few people together, a panoply of luminaries from progressive New York, as one of the book reviews eventually said. I took that as a compliment. And we published a conversation that tried to set out the arrogance of the United States' global ambitions as signified by the Twin Towers, and the displacement of the old-time electronic stores and even older Syrian and Lebanese community from the Lower West Side to build the World Trade Center, and the immense sadness of the tragedy of losing 3,000 lives on one sunny September morning. This was a complicated book to put together and a complicated mix of ideas, but for Michael, it was necessary. I learned from the experience of collaborating with him that he's impatient. You never want to spend a day proofreading a book manuscript with him in a closed room. But Michael was so quick and so often impeded by others, by the university, by architectural clients, by petty bureaucrats and politicians, and by the very achievements of capitalism. Michael understood that to make a building is to be constrained by a matrix of calculations and patrons and bureaucracies. But to make an edited book is to build ideas, and that way is the way to freedom. In every way, Michael was, in the immortal phrase about the Twin Towers that he wrote in our introduction to After the World Trade Center, the Everest of our urban Himalayas. And that's what he remains. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. I'll now introduce our next speakers. Michael Sorkin's career spanned architecture, academia, and activism. And the same is true of our next speakers. San Diego-based Teddy Cruz and Fonna Forman are partners in what they describe as a research-based political and architectural practice. Fonna Forman is professor of political theory at UC San Diego, and she is active in state and international level organizations dealing with human rights and climate change solutions. Guatemala-born Teddy Cruz is an architect, artist, and theorist whose work in life knows no borders, national or disciplinary. Estudio Cruz Forman designs, interventions, and writings have been published globally, and in 2018, they represented the United States at the Venice Biennale. Fonna and Teddy, the floor is yours, so please tell us which Sorkin work you have picked, perhaps saying something about the saturated visuals that will appear with your words. Take it away.
Yes, it's an honor to be part of this. We chose the text Trafficking Democracy. American society is divided today between those who wear masks and those who don't, between those eager to be vaccinated and those who refuse. The dissolution of social reciprocity The collision between collective commitment and rugged individualism, between public and private, remain the single greatest obstacle to healing our society and rebuilding more equitable and inclusive cities as we slowly emerge from this pandemic. And climate change is coming. COVID-19 was the canary in the coal mine, like the universe testing us to get our priorities straight. We hear every day about viral mutations, and we wonder, can this virus that took Michael, mutate into an unexpected antidote to selfishness? Can this moment expose the collective costs of austerity, of eroding the social safety net, of neglecting public challenges like racism, deepening inequality, and surging nationalism everywhere?
In 1997, Michael was invited to deliver the Raul Wallenberg Lecture at the University of Michigan. Wallenberg was a Swedish diplomat and architect who saved thousands of Jews in German-occupied Hungary during the later stages of World War II. Honoring this humanitarian architect and trafficker of people in an undemocratic state, Michael called his talk Traffic in Democracy, a powerful and hilarious reflection on the afflictions of urban democracy. The piece transcends decades, Michael's voice lampooning the idiocy and injustices of rapidly accelerating late 20th century neoliberal life in America, and yet is astonishingly relevant and germane to this moment. The images looping through our talk are the color plates from this slim, beautiful volume. Michael's urban fantasies of Weed, Arizona, Fieselhovede, Germany, and Neurasia, an imaginary city located somewhere between Hong Kong and Hanoi. Michael's narrative centers on the idea of propinquity, a concept that he and Joan explored further in their 1999 collection, Giving Ground, The Politics of Propinquity. For Michael, being together physically, bodies in space, was essential to the practice of deliberative democracy, and it was radically opposed to the American version of democracy born on the frontier, understood as the right to be left alone. Michael valued an urbanity of propinquity, equitable linkages, connections, flows, and exchanges, where freedom is a collective and civic concept, active, positive, participatory. At bottom, propinquity summarized Michael's determination to coexist with others in urban space. We cannot possibly imagine freedom, he said, outside of a structure of interaction with others. City air makes people free.
Propinquity was an illuminating concept to us back then, and we wonder how we had ever lived without it. And now, with Michael gone, as we convene in our Zoom boxes, we feel we have never in our lifetimes needed this concept more. Democracy demands cities designed for propinquity. Michael loved the Athenian Agora, a funky urban space that supported both efficient passage and organized encounters while simultaneously offering innumerable routes and circumstances for chance, unstructured, accidental, and serendipitous encounters, so intrinsic to the working of democracy. He might as well have been describing his beloved New York, a perpetually unstable juxtaposition engine, as he called it. But Michael worried that propinquity was under attack by a variety of forces, some remarkably relevant to our moment. One was the systematic fragmentation of the public, a function of both fashionable communitarian erosion from within, as well as privatization from without. He worried that identitarian entrenchment fragmented the public into multiple publics vying for recognition that undermine collective resistance to the forces of privatization encroaching into our public spaces. Communitarianism also unwittingly fueled the strategies to market architecture as a bridge to fixed identities that typically ends up dispossessing and gentrifying urban neighborhoods.
He never imagined the virtual world we now all inhabit, but even in its nascence, Michael saw the internet as a menacing threat to democracy. While proponents were heralding the possibilities of instantaneous and free global communication, and there were examples, emancipatory examples around the world, no doubt, Michael worried about reinventing proximity through virtual encounter and saw little value, for example, in virtual town halls, which he described as a passive spectacle of someone else being heard. For Michael, democracy demands participation reliably in the open. He asked, quote, "What happens when neither wealth nor information nor happiness is exchanged face to face, when communication increasingly takes place by dissolving the space of action?" Michael's was an urbanity of the body. If the body ever ceases to be the privileged means of participation in and enjoyment of urban life, he wrote, urban life is at an end. For him, the answer to a bodiless body politic, to anti-public, anti-collective, consumerized, gated and themed idiocy was always to return the body to democracy. This is the driving theme of his Wallenberg lecture, and we have no doubt this would be his response today: return the body to democracy. And for Michael, the neighborhood is always the urban increment, a space of face-to-face deliberation among bodies in real time. Neighborhoods are the logical scale for local democracy and environmental accountability. Neighborhoods harmonize the speed of the market and the slowness of the civic, the private and the public, and challenge the frontier mentality of growth, understood as an unlimited horizon to manipulate value at the edges. Michael's radicalization of urban ecology was like Jane Jacobs on green steroids, but stained with a little bit of red, reminding us that greening the city without social priorities is just decoration and a feel-good response to environmental crisis.
What a moment he left us in. He might tell us now that the virus which took him might be the strange harbinger of something better, exposing the stupidity of selfishness during a collective crisis, the catastrophe of freedom thinking, of isolationism, of disinvestment from public goods, and the eroding of public commitment. Maybe this moment can instigate a paradigm shift in our public priorities once we bodily reunite. Can we envision the end of capitalist greed, the reemergence of a progressive welfare state, a commitment to more equitable and sustainable cities, the reorganization of institutions to confront racial injustice? Our entrance into the third decade of the 21st century has been a wake-up call of our radical interdependence, our need for truth, transparency, social trust, and planetary coordination. Perhaps from all of this, a renewed public consciousness might be born, reminding us that the survival of the individual depends on the health of the collective.
But Michael worried that architects were dropping the ball. He believed they needed to engage this reconstruction of common ground. He closed Traffic and Democracy with a bucket of cold water. If you like what I'm saying here, why in practice are you all so damned complicit? Why have you embraced a politics of disengagement, abandoning the field to the avatars of bigness and smallness who have in common the production of sameness? We've become phobic, he said, of thinking of cities as physical as well as social constructions. And we suffer from a tremendous poverty of both vision and will. The dominant models are completely unsatisfactory, consisting of go with the flow neo-suburbanism, fingers crossed laissez-faire, tepid riffs on the Garden City, retreaded modernism, and Disneyland. He insisted we scrutinize our cliches and platitudes as urbanists and architects, our banal ways of practicing. He inspired an entire generation, us included, to reflect critically on our own practices, why we do what we do, for whom, where, when, and how. He taught, wrote, and practiced by example.
Michael's urban fantasies over decades, made of strange organic architectural shapes, unfolding seamlessly within social and ecological systems, threading public space, mobility, and housing as integrated social scaffolds, were both anarchic and unyieldingly civic. They manifested a commitment to progressive governance and the agency of bottom-up self-organization and civic participation. Michael's writings, sketches, and the echo of his words will always remind us of our radical interdependence. It's difficult to put into a few words the weight of a legacy. Michael will remain the social and political consciousness of the architectural field. He believed architects can be political agents, taking a position against what is morally and ethically wrong. His memory is heavy with traces he left us. So let's carry forward his infectious optimism for a better world, his childish energy, lifting up the potential of everything from the rubble of conflict, injustice, alienation, and pandemic.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Teddy and Fonna. That was terrific. Now on to the last speaker. More boundary breaking is true of Eyal Weizman, evident in his current title as Professor of Visual and Spatial Cultures at the Goldsmiths Art University in London. Weizman has worked extensively in Palestine and Gaza, and even has designed a folly in Gwangju, South Korea. He virtually invented the field of forensic architecture, and his next to newest book is Forensic Architecture, Violence at the Threshold of Detectability. Eyal, please tell us your choice of Sorkin work and how it inspires your own ideas and practice.
Sorry, do you hear me?
Yes.
And see, I suppose.
Yes.
We can have the first slide, and you would see that my choice really is a trilogy of books by Michael, the kind of the Palestine trilogy, if you, in lack of a better term, The Next Jerusalem, Against the Wall, and the new absolutely fabulous book on Open Gaza. And I think also that, in a sense, if we would, what the question and what demand, what would Michael call be on us today, I think, is to imagine now having almost a year break from the world, coming back to it, what kind of world we coming back to? But I want to start with my history with Michael. And you can see this photograph that is at the top of the book, The Next Jerusalem. And they say that if you don't like yourself in an image, put it aside and look it back in 10 years. It's almost 23 years since this image was taken in July 1998. And looking at it, as I did just this week, filled me with both love and with sorrow. But in a sense, in seeing Michael here at the top row on the right, I think that seeing photographs of Michael would need to always show him together with the groups, together with the collectivities he has put together. And this was a pretty unlikely coalition. He managed to seduce a group of architects and other intellectuals, historians, filmmakers from Palestine, Israel, and worldwide to join a conference on occupied and segregated Jerusalem. So there's here, you can see John on the right. You could see Suad Amiri, the Palestinian writer and architect, Rashid Halidi, Omar Yusuf, and even Ariela Azulay in the front left, looking like a PhD student. And me on the top right, not far from Michael, as an undergraduate student. He actually picked me, I was an undergraduate architectural student. He invited me to come to stand next to my intellectual heroes, feeling like a complete and total imposter. But the question he posed to us all, what are you going to do about it? I think I owe my path in architecture to that question, and definitely it's what put me on it. Next photograph, please. So the conference was not really in sticky, crowded summer, the summer weather of Jerusalem, but on this lakeside villa in Bellagio, Italy. And I said, I was an undergraduate student, that this is how standard academic conferences look like. That is what you do. If you join an academic career, you're taken to places like that to meet interesting people and to speak. Only that ever since one dreary lecture room after another, it was all downhill from this point. Next. So Michael really remained my architectural godfather, and to a certain extent, I think that career building and expanded the range of his own practice. And he was incredibly generous and committed to so many young practitioners that he believed in. So, those kind of intervention, that exactly what you need to be put on your career path. Somebody to read your text, give it a little modification, a few comments, maybe the title, introduce you to a publisher, write a blurb, and off you go. But together with John, he was also a family friend. And Alma, my daughter, is still his spoiled goddaughter. Next, please. And I think that what is particular for me about Michael's architectural conception is that it was multiple. There was many things that he thought and did with architecture, those playful and fantastic drawing, strategic mode of public intervention, but crucially also, next slide, please, using architecture as a mode of analysis, as a way of seeing, as a kind of an optics that could allow you, or could allow us, spatial practitioners, to offer something to politics, to offer political reading that perhaps other fields, journalism, history, etc., would not. A certain architectural intelligence and logic that will allow us to identify the crucial apparatus in a particular situation and actually intervene. So architecture was never simply a kind of a process that would lead to a project, but architecture as a field was I think, one of the main projects that he pursued and was most effective in. So he showed in each one of the projects that he did, and in each one of the manifestation of architecture that he pursued, that architecture itself could be expanded. So he transformed the field in which we are operating. Next, please. So that, there's no next, so backwards. So the book projects on Palestine that I mentioned before, The Next Jerusalem, which had really a fantastic set of intervention at a particular point of time, at the end of at the moment of realization that the Oslo process ended up becoming a spatial trap for Palestinians. And then immediately with Against the Wall, a kind of a really fine reading of politics through the eyes of different architects. And Open Gaza, again, returning to a set of amazing propositions that I've heard from Palestinian friends there and elsewhere, are giving hope and imagination of the kind of place that Gaza could be. So I think that those three and the relation between them capture very much the kind of the size, the size and variety of his thought that was so large and rich and varied that one can spend a lifetime career pursuing merely one of the thread that are kind of bundled together in his work. And I think that now, considering that question, what is the world we are going to return to in a month, in half a year, in a year, when we are allowed to leave our flats and apartments and houses and move back into the public space? Is it going to be the same public space we've left? Have we done anything now to make it a better place for us? And I think what we see rather than those that had to build walls, physical walls that separate and control, are now using more digital surveillance. And in particular, given COVID and the global health emergency, to encroach on civil liberties, to control, to divide, to survey. So we need to channel something of Michael to continue the fight. Indeed, we lost Michael to COVID. And COVID creates new modes of separation. When we say when we go back to the world, who are we? Who is going back and who is staying in? What kind of world will we return to? This concrete wall is dumb. It has never been more than just an exercise in security metaphysics. In any way, it did not even create a division. It was built on Palestinian lands. It was completely perforated. And border conditions were overall throughout the kind of the deep space of Palestine. Israel is now being congratulated on its treatment of COVID. But while the majority of citizens of Israel are vaccinated, Palestinians in the West Bank, entangled completely with those citizens, are in pockets that are not vaccinated, subject to repeated outbreaks. The vaccination program has not even begun there. Meanwhile, Israel is sending the excess vaccination that it has and using them to conduct some kind of worldwide diplomacy. These days in Israel, you need a vaccination passport to enter cinemas, concerts, and other collective spaces. Soon, this vaccination passport is going to become synonymous with a new politics of segregation and apartheid. It might become, Palestine, the first place of a certain kind of healthcare separation. How to understand that, how to confront that, how to design a way out of it is what I believe Michael would like us to use architecture for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eyal, and all the speakers. We're going to shift now to a discussion for about 10, 15 minutes. I'd ask that all of the panelists turn on their videos and their mics so we can see each other and interact a bit. So much has been raised, and we can raise many more subjects here. When Michael died, the two-word attribution in all the obituaries, of course, was architecture critic. So my first question, just to start things off, is about that. Architectural criticism in the print sense is waning in newspapers, magazines, and so on. It thrives in books, but it's changing. So I guess my first question is, are things shifting from architectural criticism on the page to critical practice? In other words, engaging with the world in different ways, sometimes in art galleries, sometimes in civic meetings, sometimes in other forums. So perhaps, Fonna and Teddy, you could start with this, because you've done a lot of critical practice. Is activism the new frontier of architectural criticism?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they were seamless for Michael. I mean, I guess Richard Sennett in his video clip sort of put his finger on, Michael believed in making people uncomfortable, and architecture and writing was really a tool to do this. He was sort of a 20th century, 21st century Socrates, right? Sort of a gadfly biting at the ass of this sort of complacent and consumerist city. You know, like Socrates, he was provoking the question, how do we want to live? So I think his call to urban imagination was grounded in a profound discomfort and making people conscious of what actually is making them so uncomfortable.
I think that interface has always existed, to tell the truth, in terms of that relationship of the construction of a critical practice from which a more broad criticism on the page really, you know, how it unfolds. But I think that what might begin to change as we need to really intervene more forcefully in the construction of public opinion, as truth has been hijacked so vehemently really in the last years, is that really is about activating the voice of the unheard as intertwined with that critical practice. I think the praxis of the everyday life in communities really has been inspired us, at least in our own practice, but it was always the kind of axis of our conversation with Michael. and how to facilitate, politically represent, and carry that knowledge and the urgency of those voices to transform institutions today democratizes criticism in that sense.
Well, let me speak up for trying to sustain media platforms that hire architectural critics. You know, for many years, the relatively small number of daily print newspapers that employed full-time architectural and urbanism critics was decreasing, and now there's probably a handful of media platforms that support that kind of persistent published criticism. Critical architectural practice is necessary, but it's also necessary to reach the public. As several speakers have pointed out, the public is incredibly fragmented these days. Even the left-wing public is fragmented. There must be publications that reach out to inform, to educate, and to inflame. That's got to be our task as well as other people's task.
Thank you, Sharon. Eyal, could you turn on your mic? And I'd love to hear what you have to say.
No, I think obviously we need to understand that criticism, as it has emerged as a written kind of philatonic practice, or in articles, etc., need to be extended. And in fact, I think it is continuing the legacy of the sort of feisty kind of combative criticism that Michael has championed, that we need to bring that criticism to forums or fora where they can actually matter. So sometimes this is news platforms, indeed. Sometimes, and this is the case for us in forensic architecture, you bring architectural intelligence, you bring architectural research into the courts in order to force your opinion through, and sometimes to truth commissions, and sometimes to citizens' inquiry, etc. There are multiple of ways of doing that, but you need to make sure that critique is operative and that it finds the right forum for it in order to make a difference. And I think that is very important these days, when the so-called challenge to truth practices, all this sort of discussion about post-truth that seem to be a new thing. But I think anyone that has been in and dealing with colonialism or part of an anti-colonial movement knows that the story of post-truth is a very long one. And we've been dealing with that for many, many years. In particular, I think that as architects, we have a voice and we have something to say within that field. Because when the instinctive reaction to this questioning of the authority of institutions, sometimes of the liberal left, and I think it's very misguided, is to resort back to the last position of safety, to buttress the pillars of power knowledge, the university, the court system, the FBI sometimes, could they rescue us from that political system that you had, etc. And I think this is a profound error. I think that we need to embrace the challenge to truth practice. And we need to build something new. We need to build a new diagram in which, like Fonna and Teddy are saying, we need to work together with people at the forefront of struggle, build a community of practice that include volunteers and activists and architects, and find a fora in order to intervene, but not to accept that and try to build a new world of institutional authority.
Now, the charge to us is, what would Michael call on us to do next? And descriptions from all of you, it's a difficult task. Many different skills are needed: political, public, communicative, illustrative, design. Where do we start? I think what we want to maybe we can give a few clues to people listening today. How do you start a critical practice? How do you make a criticism that delivers to people? How do we open up public debate? Any suggestions? How do we start? Sharon?
Well, as I said before, let's publish a book, right? Let's put on a play. Let's publish a book. You know, I live very close to where Michael and Joan lived for many years, memorialized in that favorite book of mine, 20 Minutes in Manhattan. And I've been watching the discussions about a proposal to rezone Soho and NoHo to lower Manhattan neighborhoods that are a hodgepodge of zoning restrictions, but occupy very desirable land for real estate developers. And I'm really so distressed by the need for Michael to be here to try to suggest how to overcome the on the one hand, the Zoom meetings and their disembodiment of public discussion. And on the other hand, the severe generational split that has opened up between self-styled YIMBYs and NIMBYs, with the YIMBYs represented by a younger generation of people who could not care less about some of the political reforms of the Jane Jacobs era, the late 60s and early 70s, like community boards that actually have some decision-making power about what gets built in their neighborhoods. And the older generation is, you know, older artists who have somehow found a privileged niche. And it really is just a finger-hold niche in the very competitive housing market of New York City. And historic preservationists who are now lampooned as partisans of white privilege. So I'm really reaching out to Michael for how to overcome this split, how to bring people together in a progressive way that does not destroy the achievements of an older generation, to accept the capitalist compromises that have emerged as the only way to build affordable housing. Now, this is, I'm talking about a very parochial neighborhood situation that comes out of our propinquity and our housing market and our zoning conditions in Lower Manhattan. But these are the issues that stirred Michael, some of his best writing and criticism and ideas. What do we do? What do we do about this in our front yard?
Thank you, Sharon. I think one of the most amazing qualities of Michael in his writing is his wit, his use of humor, the puns, the absurdities, the surrealism. Now, it's a really interesting question. How we use that as a tool of critical engagement? Fonna, I'd like to ask you, because you sit on those state level and international commissions, et cetera. Is there a place for wit and humor and subversive surrealism in august organizations?
I mean, yeah, I think it's a challenge to this sort of sterile sort of social science of urban inequality. I mean, humor can help expose and shake loose sort of sedimented perceptions of things, and turn the heart differently than through facts and so forth. So I think he was just a master at that. But if I could just say something very quickly, Trev, about your initial question about, where would he take us right now? Where would he go? It was damn serious. I mean, the one thing I think that that COVID obviously did, and this came out in a lot of our conversations today, is it exposed the dramatic disproportionate vulnerability of underserved populations here in the US and across the world. And I think in many ways, with climate change accelerating and the disproportionate vulnerabilities in that dynamic about to fall down hard on us, I think COVID was a kind of early sort of warning sign. And I think, in terms of something practical along those lines of inequality, is I think that his solutions, particularly for the city, and I'm thinking of New York City, but other cities too, would be to orient solutions moving forward around the essential worker. That there's so much, we have so much gratitude, those of us who were safely locked up in our boxes during this, but the essential workers were on the street doing what they needed to do to help us all. And I think that Michael would really resist that those people would now sink back into obscurity and invisibility. I think the solutions need to elevate that work.
Can I add to that for a moment, Trevor? And maybe going back to the humor, because I think that, that's somehow what also linked me personally. I'm Latin American, and there is something about the kind of use of humor and as almost, I don't want to call it a method, but a way of the kind of agility, let's say, that Michael had to weave it into obviously extremely critical and serious stuff. But I think that there is a kind of negotiation, right, between fiction and reality and the kind of meandering through that as a method really might be, I'm convinced can be spatialized at some point. I mean, there's something about that. But I wanted to say also the issue of the question, going back to what to do now, or at least in terms of in terms of the audience in relationship to the construction of a critical practice, which actually might not be the place to really open it up. But I think that thinking of Michael about dislocating ourselves somehow to, from the expected or predictable sides, and to really begin to mobilize conflict as a creative tool. This is something that really for us always, was essential in our conversations with Michael, to really reposition ourselves to understanding the conditions themselves that have produced the crisis. And those conditions are become the material. I'm wondering what Michael would say at this moment, unprecedented moment when potentially a $3 trillion package of public investment is being, assembled. Would we become interlocutors? Our profession, our realm, the spatialization of propinquity might be a topic at this moment, because that would require a new political economy at the intersection really between the top down and the bottom up. Just like his beautiful drawings, which really mediated between large scale infrastructure, right? The kind of coordination at regional and territorial scales, but without forgetting the micro, that the granularity of life as lived. So I think this interface between top down and bottom up needs to be facilitated at this moment, between the planned and the unplanned. And I think that this is maybe a moment for architecture as a whole to really become finally a participant to lead a new political project.
Okay, thank you very much, Teddy and Fonna and Sharon. I think we'll give the last word to Eyal. At this post-pandemic moment, with Israel having the highest vaccine rates in the world, and will maybe be the first.
Palestine,
what do we do at this moment?
Lowest.
Yeah, in Palestine. Yeah. What's the prospect for post-pandemic action?
No, I think this is exactly, this is why in so many moments our thinking about Palestine, and I know also Michael's thinking, is a kind of a laboratory of the extreme. You look at what's happening in the West Bank, and in some way you see manifestations of that in other places. So in Israel, Palestine, it's all kind of like densely packed together, bubbling against each other. But I think that in a sense, it's exactly that break from the public space that we had for 1 year that allow you to overpass one of the biggest hurdles to imagination, to political imagination, to architectural imagination. That's inertia. You know, the inertia of every day, the incremental reality. Now we have a possibility. We are out. We are coming back in. Who is coming back in? This is going to be staggered. This is going to be differentiated. There are multiple conflicts at that moment when the return, the staggered return, is happening into the world. And I think at that moment, you need those two sides of Michael's practice. On the one hand, you need to know that that space and that year has been used by people that we want to have nothing to do with, people that are interested in control or in corporate expansion, etc., that have their plan and have their system of what to do at that moment of return. So we need to know how to confront it, how to analyze it, how to oppose it. And on the other hand, the imagination to actually project another world, because it's exactly that space, that river of time between, you know, that separate the moment that we left the public space and the moment we return, that allow us to imagine a different way of living together.
Thank you very much, Eyal. That was very, very eloquent, and the same to all of you. I think this is an amazing start. No inertia on this panel, and I hope we all get to meet and do this in detail, or maybe even on the page. So I think we're going to go to the last portion of the program now, and there'll be a video tribute. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
I'm actually going to change the order of the events ever so slightly, and I'm going to welcome Michael's partner, Joan Copjec, to share a final reflection before showcasing the final video segment. Joan, can I welcome you on screen, please? Or on microphone, rather. Welcome, Joan.
Yes, first I want to thank all the organizers of this event, Dan, Julio, Sean, Tammy, Rosalie, Vigianti, Dean, and Trevor, all the speakers, Sharon, Teddy, Fonna, and Eyal, and I also want to apologize for not appearing barefaced, but behind this kind of a digital veil. I thought this was the best way to handle a difficult situation, if you don't mind. Early in my relationship with him, a friend related to me her perception of Michael. She insisted that he was V-shaped. If I embraced her opaque comment as discerning, it's likely because it exploded in my head a volcano of V words, which I attached to his person, to his fulgurating energy, the boundless generosity of his oversourced talents, see, his power of speech. Master of a verdant vocabulary, Michael was blessed with a voice remarkable for its vividness, the vistas it opened, the valor of its commitments, the values it refused to surrender. How vividly I remember the moment when sitting on the floor of my tiny apartment, talking to him on the phone, I felt myself suddenly unsettled by the sound of his voice. It was as if these V words had all convened at once to reverberate a certainty I didn't know I'd reached. This voice belonged to a man from whom I never wanted to part. There's an image, the napkin one. Yeah. Weeks before our wedding, Michael and I were dining out. I was mostly quiet, terrified by the momentous step we were taking. Afraid to ask what was wrong, Michael scribbled his question on a napkin. Have you changed your mind? Only from him. Whose power of voice was so remarkable, could its simple retreat have such an effect on me? No, never. I scribbled back, certain once again. Okay. Several years later, it dawned on me that I had too hastily letterized my friend's insight. After all, her remark had ascribed a shape to Michael, not to a letter of the alphabet we refer to as a V. How is a V shaped, I wondered, such that we are able to identify it wherever it appears? The answer is as simple as the shape. V is the form of a widening conjoined with a narrowing. If this was so, it no longer seemed necessary to picture it only standing upright like the letter, since it is equally recognizable when turned on its side, like this, say. Laterally rotated, this figure seemed to figure Michael's propulsive gait, the energy with which he plowed forward to accomplish the goals he was determined to achieve. It was surely not arbitrary that this rotation occurred to me as Michael was writing 20 Minutes in Manhattan, in which he turned his daily journey from our apartment to his office, his 20-minute walk into the propedeutic exercise that led him to develop his dense diagnoses of the historical alteration of Manhattan's neighborhoods, what was valuable and worth preserving, what was wrong and needed to be undone. By the time 250 Things an Architect Should Know was composed, my reading of the rotated symbol had lost its bloom. Why focus so narrowly on the narrowing? Why view resoluteness as a tapering, the taming of a myriad of perverse forces via reduction to a single agenda? No, this could not be right, and it was certainly not Michael. His list of 250 things begins with another urban walk, but listen to the opening entry's description of the manner in which foot hits the ground, as the feel of cold marble under bare feet. Most of you know that Michael conceptualized the city as an accident machine, conceived not in the manner of bumper cars knocking into each other. These accidents affect human relations and the entire machinery. The disposition of urban encounters is subtended, as it now appears here, by an economy of pleasure. It is not only the sensuousness of the initial entry, but the rhythm and rollout of the list that attests to the presence of this economy. In an age that disparages utopia as a naive idealist notion, Michael championed a utopian agenda aggressively vacated of these faults. Never did he imagine utopia as some ideal world where all conflicts would be dissolved and all goods distributed equally. For he knew well that pleasure ensures the impossibility of equilibrium. How can everyone be happy with her share of the pie if pie is not what everyone wants? Michael's own suspicions gathered support from Patrick Geddes, who wrote about super necessities which go beyond the natural requirements needed to sustain life and provide instead an exorbitant enjoyment that radically jeopardizes every form of harmony. So if it is not an ideal world if not in an ideal world absent of tension, where does Michael situate utopia? His answer is precise. 1, an indeterminate distance from the present, and 2, in fiction necessarily. I won't attempt to unfold these arguments here, although it would be an important task, but want only to draw attention to the way they flip the laterally rotated V shape, which now looks like this, what you see. The phrase indeterminate distance gestures to a future that isn't merely ahead of the present, but significantly absent from it. This absence injects a negativity into the present, something not there. Not only is there no future, it has not and will never arrive as future, but no ground either. The present is defined now by contingency, caught in the tension between what may or may not be. This tension does not expose a problem of knowledge, but an ontological hesitancy in being itself, and offers utopian thinkers the opportunity to intervene where nothing is yet decided. Michael insists that these interventions are of the order of fictions, adding necessarily, which seems to suggest that these fictions are not trivial, but possess an ontological dignity which resides in their ability to lend human life a visibility it would not otherwise have, given the retreat of ground to which contingency bears witness. Here finally is the way this shape that you see on the screen seems to operate, if I read Michael properly. The narrowing reaches back to penetrate sheer inexistence, the withdrawal of ground. It starts off from a point of sheer contingency, unavailable to rational demonstration, and widens out like a horn of light into a myriad of forms of the possible. It displays then the shape or form of an actual act of forming, an act of imagination. If I identify Michael finally with this shape, it is because of his almost unimaginable capacity for imagination in a variety of genres. There is no one who has not observed that this capacity was bound up with his capacity for enjoyment. I close precipitously then by noting that the curious appearance in 250 things of entries of entry 5, the distance a shout carries in a city, and 6, the distance of a whisper. 5 acknowledges the widening, the invention of social territories constantly destabilized by the enjoyment it cannot fully accommodate, while 6 registers a more intimate space where the one who invents experiences his own capacity for invention through the actual presence of another. If this other is necessary, it is because capacity cannot feel itself. It is impalpable to itself. This was a complaint Michael constantly reiterated. He was anesthetic with regard to his own existence. This is not most likely the reason why he gathered so many of us, so many others around him to share in his projects and pleasure. How very lucky we all were. Michael, I love you and miss you more than even you, with all your powers of imagination can imagine. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Joan.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you, Joan, and thank you to everyone who's gathered with us today. I know that Michael would have been honored to have hundreds of comrades calling in from around the world. So thank you. I know he would have wanted today's event to launch 1,000 ships, and so I hope you'll join us. With that, I'm gonna turn over to the final video segment and we'll conclude the event. Thank you very much, everybody.
After just a few minutes of hearing us pitch our project, you could see him get excited by it. I mean, I remember thinking, here's a man who's not allowed age to take any of his excitement away. He was as gleeful as any of us and was really excited about what we're trying to do. There, immediately I knew we had found a partner with both the pedigree and the interest to actually build what we're trying to do here. We had banked on his intellectual capacity to also help us kind of dissect our vision in a way that was going to be truly unique. And to have lost him at that point, something that became a defining moment for us in what we're trying to build here. We've gone on to name one of our spaces after him, and we think we can do more given how much energy he brought to us in the middle of all of what we're trying to build. Michael's work, in my view, and his ideas shaped a lot of what we are trying to build here in Accra.
Michael, my friend, my brotherhood kind of friend, supporter, a mentor. Probably the best word to describe him is a passionate comrade. I'm so happy. So his last project, he worked together with me, just won the international competition, the Beihai New City Planning, New Town, the Lianzhou Bay New City. It is a wonderful project. He visited the site twice and he proposed some brilliant ideas to catalyze this development of this coastal new city.
And what impressed me about him is that I felt finally understood in a way, because we ended up speaking about Amazonia for hours and he knew so much about the region. And I have to say, I hadn't encountered anyone in the world of architecture who could have that conversation. And I was extremely impressed. Most of the people, when I attempted to discuss Amazonia, now it's fashionable. Lots of architects are doing studios that are based on Amazonia all over the world. But I'm talking about 2004, 2005. And back then, most people just reacted, of course, from their enlightenment understanding of the region, that why would you want to look into that area? It's not urban, it's not where architects should be. Let the ecologists go there. You know, why are you so interested in that place? Michael never made a comment of that type. He immediately understood. I felt less lonely in the world of architecture thanks to Michael. That's what I would say. I think that Michael had a very interesting relationship with power, and he was fearless. And I know that power acquires many forms. There's intellectual power, of course. He had that. And there's economic political power, but he was also very aware that there's power at the level of the commune and power at the level of the incremental and the additive. Because Michael, as an architect and an urbanist, was interested in designing habitat, and he worked very closely with landscape architects too and loved them. So I see him now as, he's very Amazonian in his mindset. He had an integral mind, an integral way of designing.
Michael ended one of his last emails to me in his usual affirmative and rambunctious note. Let's win this. Around that time, he also sent me a couple of other emails, or ended his emails by saying, let's make money, or can't wait for a curry together. He meant Bengali chicken curry. Whenever we met or whenever we exchanged emails, Michael and I had some grand plans, some around Bangladesh. In 2016, I invited him to our institute in Dhaka for a week-long program with students and architects. His visit was full of the usual, inspiring banters, insightful discussions, and promises architects make to imagine a better life for everyone. Of course, Michael had the grandest plan, a better future for the planet. His public talk in Dhaka was titled, "The Planet is in Deep Shit." And I learned from him about this ferocious devotion, about the autonomy of cities, about the local autonomy of neighborhoods, about the city as serendipity and surprise, even in that 20 minutes walk, and also about social justice and diversity, about reconstructing the street in the ecology of the city, about sustainability as taking local responsibility, and about radical responsibility to the cities we live in. He has now left to us to do all the outraging and winning. So here's to Michael. Let's win this.